Dr. Ana Maria. My pronouns are she, hers. And I am the founder and CEO of Dr. Ana Maria Consulting. I work with Latino professionals in tech who are strong performers but are ready to move into more strategic, invisible roles. So my focus is really practical, y'all. I help you build executive presence without feeling like you have to change who you are, navigate bias and ambiguity with strategy instead of guesswork, and make clear, intentional career moves that position you for promotion and leadership. So I've spent over 15 years leading across sectors and coaching hundreds of professionals from early career to executive roles. And the patterns that are consistent are that the talent is not the issue, right? Like you all have the skill sets, you all have worked incredibly hard to be where you are today. And oftentimes what we need to work on is on positioning, on visibility and strategy. So if you're at a point where you know that where you want to head, like you know your capabilities, but you want to level up, I'm the right girl to talk to. And so we're going to move to slide number 3, Cultura and Leadership Group Coaching. And so I want to start by saying that it is truly an honor to be here today with you today. This is my second year collaborating with Tequeria. And what stands out most to me is not just the talent in this community, but how each of you shows up for each other. I've seen members secure roles simply by leveraging the Slack channel, the community, by making sure that you're asking for referrals, you're doing informational interviews, you're getting feedback on your portfolios. And that is not small. That is how careers accelerate. That is the social capital that we all need in order to have access to those invisible rules of tech, of like the tech industry, where we are not often told exactly what to do. So I'm going to encourage you all to keep doing that. Do not hesitate to ask for help and advocate for yourself in this community. I also want to let you know, as a member, you also have access to group coaching with me. So I encourage you all to take advantage of that. That is free 99 through your membership at Tequeria. So please go ahead and look out for those dates. Would love to have you. And today you're going to get a sample of what that feels like. And for those of you who want deeper, more structured experience, I also offer group coaching through a program called Cultura and Leadership. Many of you have already joined, so I'm sure your peers can share about that. So if you have questions about that, let me know. But also the reason why I'm bringing that up is because we're giving away a free seat to our Q3 cohort. And in order for you to participate in the raffle, all you have to do is go ahead and go on my LinkedIn profile. You could look me up as Dr. Ana Maria Lopez Caldwell, very short name, and repost my very last post that you see on the screen with one takeaway from today's session, and that's how you enter. Next week, I will be announcing the winner. All right, so moving on to the next slide. So today we're going to be spending the next 50 minutes building community and redefining executive presence. I don't know if many of you know this, but less than 1% of leadership development is culturally relevant. Most of what we're taught about executive presence, about how to show up in the tech spaces, is based on narrow dominant standards. And at the same time, we also know that the data is really clear. Latino employees are underrepresented throughout technology, and especially when we look at senior leadership. And so to give you an example, if we think about the United States, roughly 1 in 5 workers in the United States is Latino. But roughly 1 in 10 tech workers are Latinos, right? So that just shows you the gap that we have in terms of access to even making it to entry-level positions in technology. So what does that mean? Why is that an important thing to keep in mind? It means that many of us have not necessarily had the access to a critical mass of leaders who reflect our identities. And that's why I love Tequeria so much, in the community and the work that you all are doing here, because that's that social capital that we need. And in the absence of that social capital, it becomes easy to default to assimilation, to study and replicate what leadership has traditionally looked like, even when it doesn't feel aligned, right? So when we think about executive presence, oftentimes that may start feel like performance rather than authority. And for any of you who have experienced that, what is even more frustrating is that perhaps you show up in a room and you feel like you're assimilating. You don't feel like you're being your full self. And so that's like one problem, right? Like you don't feel great about that. But then you recognize that you're behaving that way and now you're mad at yourself for it, right? So it's like a double whammy of like guilt and like not really allowing us to feel like we can stand in our power. So today, everybody, today it's so special because what we're doing is we're going to challenge that narrative that we have to assimilate, that we have to show up and fit a particular mold. And that's what professionalism and that's what executive presence looks like. We're going to redefine executive presence as identity aligned authority. How you lead, how you communicate, and how you show up matters. And it should be rooted in who you are and how you know yourself. And so we're going to do this by leveraging your lived experiences and thinking about those as leadership capital. So this is very much about reflection on how your identity and your lived experiences have made you unique, and that uniqueness is the edge that gives your executive presence. You can only be competitive as a candidate, as you're applying for jobs, as you're showing up in different rooms. You can only be competitive when you're leveraging who you are and the very specific experiences, your intersectionality, your identity, like how you grew up, the things that you overcame. That's what's going to give you the edge when you are able to fully see the power in that life and that experience and that story, because that gives you a very unique perspective that nobody can have that perspective but you. So when you see the power that you hold by just being yourself, you could truly stand in that power and in that presence. And so with that, on the next slide, you have a question that I'm going to ask you all. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to go into a triad, and I'm going to send you for 6 minutes with two other folks. And so in groups, I'm going to ask you to share, how has your identity positively impacted your career? So you'll have 6 minutes in your triad, so about 2 minutes per person. I'll stay here in the main group in case you have any questions. And when we come back, I'm going to invite a couple of people to share. All right, so off you go. All right. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you had good, fruitful conversations. And I would love to hear from a couple of folks who would want to volunteer and share what conversations came up for you all in your triads. So the question is, how has your identity positively impacted your career? So feel free to share about your own experience or something that was eye-opening that your partners share, any patterns, any surprises, anything that you would like to share. And so I'll lean on you, Jolise, to help us explain how to get on this stage and chat.
Absolutely. So, folks, you may see on your screen there is a white colored button that says join stage. If you click that, the little pop-up will double check that your mic and camera are working. If you don't feel comfortable showing your face, you can turn off your camera, but please at least keep your mic on, because otherwise, how are we going to hear what you're asking? So once you click the join stage and select, you pop up right beside me and Dr. Ana Maria right here. Also, something that has been noted throughout the past couple of days with all of our speakers is, and I also want to note here with the incredible Dr. Ana Maria, is just seeing the amount of Latina folks in our community with the doctor in front of them. We just want to shout you all out. All right, Adriana, awesome. I'm gonna jump.
Hi, Adriana. I love it.
Hi, everybody. And I love that y'all sing my name right. So thank you. 'Cause I be at work and people be butchering. But how has my identity positively impacted my career? I think it just allows me to show up as who I am, right? I think it brings a different lens to certain meetings. So I work in the employee relations space, but yesterday I was having a meeting with folks in the DEI space. And so being able to kind of bridge those two together of like, this is how I do my work, right? When it comes to employee relations, especially like within the legal aspect of things, but then also like who I am as a person is going to influence the questions that I ask when we think about the gaps
Mhm.
that we're having, when we think about the folks that we work with. And I do work for a global company, so also understanding like what that looks like. Yes, something that affects folks in the US may not be something that affects our office in Asia or our office in Europe, or whatever the case is. And so I think like that has truly brought a perspective to just my work in general.
Amazing. And do you want to tell us a little bit about like your cultural heritage? And when you say identity, like what are the identities that are coming up for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a Bronx born Latina whose parents are Mexican and Puerto Rican. And so I think that also plays a big role in that. I did spend 4 years living in Mexico as well. So being able to understand like what
Oh,
it was like to live in the US versus what it was like to live in Mexico. I'm also the only US born of my siblings. So then that aspect of what that looks like. So yeah, those are the identities that affect my work and who I am.
amazing. Thank you, Adriana, for taking the courage to be the first one on stage and sharing a little bit about your identity. And you just brought so much nuance to like what it means to be Latina, right? Like it's as we know, it's not like a one size fits all. There's so many ways in which we can show up, and like that intersectionality of, like being US born, having siblings who are not, having lived in Mexico, like there are layers, right? And so the way you show up is completely different than like the way I show up, even though we both may identify as Latinas. And it matters to figure out that nuance.
I
Thank
love
you so much for sharing. I would love to invite one more person to the stage. This is like a fun platform where it's just like, I don't know who's going to show up. It's like a surprise visitor. Let's see who shows up. You can do it. You know you want to press that button.
I believe in y'all. Come on. Oh,
Yes,
Oh, we got two people.
perfect. Okay, Fernando, it looks like your app Yvette muted herself.
Yes, I'm gonna let Ibe go first because
Okay, love it.
Okay, thank you. Hola a todos. I'm Yvette Ferreira Speicia, and this is like such an interesting and I think layered question. I immigrated with my family from the Dominican Republic when I was a kiddo, and I would say that resourcefulness and resiliency and like paving the path for my sisters and honestly so many of my cousins as like the first um, kid in the family to go to college in the United States and navigate what that looks like and navigate school. I would say that yeah, I've always had to believe in my abilities and what I can do because as you probably have experienced, not everyone around you will. And as much as my parents have wanted to help me and like they have provided so much like stability in some ways, they also have tried to figure it out on their own as well. So I don't know, like being like the cultural broker for my family and being the oldest of three girls and just it has made like it's a lot of who I am, and I feel like I don't always know how to bring that forth in settings where it's a predominantly white space, and I feel like I do have to assimilate and like acquiesce to the environment.
Oh, thank you, Yvette. I absolutely love all the nuance that you're bringing to this. Um, and like all those other identities, right? Like we're talking about Latinidad, but like what does it mean to be the oldest in your family? What does it mean to be a woman? What does it mean to navigate like the tech world when like our parents may be like, I wanted you to be a doctor or a lawyer. What do you mean tech? Like what do I do in that, right? Like how do you fit into that box and how do you even explain that to your families? And all of that really matters. Um, so that's so beautiful. Thank you so much. Fernando, what about you? Oh, you would,
yes.
okay.
Oh. Yeah. So in my case, what I will say is I am uh, still recent immigrant to the United States. I've been here for 9 years. Came here because of my job. Before that, I most of my professional career was spent in Mexico. I'm Mexican, and I grew up here. I grew up there, and I feel that once I was here in the United States, it was kind of an uphill battle to get myself recognized. But one thing that was always with me, and I think comes from my Latinidad, is wanting to have more people around me. Not necessarily that look like me, but that is definitely a bonus.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, I became kind of like a community leader of sorts. And this has enabled me some wins. For example, by gathering people around to create initiatives that span across different parts of the company,
Wow.
and that's a positive influence. Another is that I come from a family of teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and that has also opened me some doors in knowing how to speak to people to explain things.
Sure.
Even though my English is not the best, but I try to make myself understand. And especially in situations where there is tension in the room, I'm not the kind of people that will rise up to the challenge often, except if nobody else is doing it, I will probably do it. But that I think comes with the territory. I'm kind of a bit shy in those situations, but things compensate with each other, and that's where I am today.
Thank you so much, Fernando, for sharing. And like one, I love the really specific example that you share about your background really allowing you to be like a connector and to like build community across industry, not industries, but across like sectors within your company, right? Like that is a very specific example of how some ways, like some of our lived experiences give us skill sets, right? Or like coming from an educator background and then being really good at being able to like teach back, right? So it's just like bringing nuance to understanding our identity from a Latinidad perspective and understanding like all of the other layers of being an introvert versus extrovert and being an educator and like what out of all of those layers, all of those experiences give you that edge, right? That allow you to positively be impacted in your career. So thank you so much for sharing, Fernando.
Thank you
And
very much.
as we think about, like what Yvette was sharing as well, she talked about these two terms of resourcefulness and resilience. And those are very complicated words, y'all. Like as Latinos and as people of color, like this is something like a complaint that I hear often. It's just like, I'm tired of being resilient. Like I don't want to have to be the one who like has the like resourcefulness, right? And so also just naming that because that's like I don't want that to get lost in the sauce. Like I think could be like some of our own hardships in our life, like they could make us really annoyed and we're allowed to be mad at all of that. And they also give us an edge, like as we think about the tech world and the corporate world. So like being able to process that and being a healthy relationship with that is super important. So I want to thank all of the volunteers who shared. I know it takes a lot to come on stage. And I want to talk a little bit about that impact of identity on leadership. I'm going to be taking a few minutes to share some data on the Latino community in the United States to really ground us in the context as we think about our identity, as we think about executive presence, and specifically as we think about the conversations we're about to have for the rest of the day. So, how can we ground ourselves in understanding that nuance? So, we're going to go to this slide, we're going to skip, we're going to go to the next slide that's called Latinidad. And when you hear me talk about Latinidad, I'm including anyone who is connected to to Latin America in any way, shape, or form. And I want to share a little bit about the history of this word because this concept of Latinidad was first coined by Felix Padilla, who's a researcher. When he was studying, he was publishing a study about Mexicans and Puerto Ricans living in Chicago in 1985. So this was a very specific context that Felix Padilla was using as he defined that term Latinidad. And if you think about it, that term is, 41 years old, is pretty young, relatively speaking, considering our history. Yet, like, it got adopted, right? Like, it just picked up, and like, we talk about Latinidad left and right. And so I want you to think about that for a second, because this term that came up to describe a very specific group of people has evolved. And now it's a term that defines 63.7 million Latinos in the United States, which make up 19% of the US population. Like, yes, y'all, like our power in the numbers, like we are growing. We are 20% of the population right now. And so as you think about that, it's really important to think about the diversity and the, like the layers that represents, right? Like we represent over 33 different Latin American countries. And while Spanish is the predominant language, followed by Portuguese, there are actually 560 languages spoken across the region. And we have Latinos that are recent migrants that came to the United States in their lifetimes, like myself. And then there are folks who are first generation, second generation, all the way to Latinos who never crossed the border, but the border actually crossed them. So it is no wonder why you may not fully identify as a Latino, or why there may be some areas where you don't feel empowered as you're like navigating parts of your identity, right? And so like that is the layer, that is one of the foundations, that's one of your identities that you're trying and you're working to navigate while you're also showing up in corporate America or in the tech space, and you're having to navigate, like how to show up with executive presence, how to interview well, how to convince somebody that you're the right person for the job, etc. Right? So that's a really important detail there to pay attention to. So on the next slide, when we bring this into the conversation about executive presence, we have to question the default definition. So traditionally, when we think about executive presence is defined as you gotta be polished, you gotta be professional, you gotta be confident, you gotta communicate in a particular way, right? Like that's what it looks like to be an executive. And the problem is that definition often rewards conformity and performance, right? It assumes there is a single standard that we need to align to. And what I'm proposing to you all instead is that we think about executive presence through a lens of a different definition. I invite you all to think about executive presence as clarity of thought, as self-trust, in standing in your power. So the question shifts, right? So instead of asking yourself, how well can I perform leadership? How well can I show up at this interview or at this recruiter conversation I'm about to have? I invite you all to ask yourself, how clearly do I trust myself in this space? Because executive presence is not about how well you perform, even though that you may hear that in a lot of books, right? Like the first 5 seconds when somebody sees you, like they're already making an assumption of what they're judging you. And yes, there's truth to that. But if you don't believe in yourself, I don't care how straight your back is when you're standing, or how you cross your legs, or how nice your suit is. You are not convincing anybody that you believe that you belong in that space. And you got to be the first person that needs to believe that you belong in that space so that other people can believe that you belong in that space. So executive presence is really about how clearly do you believe you yourself, like ask yourself that question. Do I belong in technology? Do I belong moving up the corporate ladder and becoming a CEO if that's what I want? You got to believe that yourself so that anybody else could do so. And so if we go to the next slide, let me name what makes that difficult, right? Like it's really easy for me to stand here and be like, believe in yourself, right? Like, sure, whatever. But let's talk about the difficulty of that in relation to our identity as Latinos. Identity plays a really central role in how we show up. And there are real external challenges that Latino professionals navigate in the workplace. Things like bias and discrimination, lack of representation at the senior level, economic barriers, and limited access to networks and social capital, right? So those are structural realities that are bigger than ourselves. We cannot control that. Even though we're 20% of the population, less than 7% of us are making it to entry-level tech jobs, right? So like, that's not you as an individual doing anything wrong. That is just the systems. And over time, those external pressures don't just stay external, but they really get internalized. They show up as self-doubt. They show up as pressure to assimilate, hesitation to speak up, difficulty in advocating for yourself. not because we lack the capability, but because we are navigating environments that were not designed with us in mind. And that's the part that often goes unspoken, right? So, on top of all of those internalized responses that we may have, like all of that pressure that we may be feeling, many of us are now also judging ourselves because of it. It's like, man, I have so much self doubt. Like, why did I do that? Like, why do I have to be this way? And so it's really important that we manage that we're like becoming aware of those external realities. And the reason why I love, love, love Tequeria, the work that Jolise is doing, and like this community in particular, is because based on my research, based on what the field is telling us, we need to hear from peers that are going through similar experiences so that we don't feel alone, because then we start thinking that the problem is us, right? And not the systems. Because yeah, it's all fun and games. We are in a gathering, we talk about this, but like you're going to go back to your own department, right? You're going to go back to your own silos where all like likely for many of you, you're the only that holds specific identities. And so it is really hard to not take that personally and to not think it's you. So the more that you're able to verbalize that with your peers and like really process and bring awareness to that, the less it becomes a thing that you're trying to fix about yourself and a thing that is more like, here's a structure. And so I need to think about how to name that, how to bring awareness to that, and then how to shift that frame so that I could actually stand in my power. The goal is to understand where it comes from and to build the awareness and tools to respond differently without turning against ourselves in the process. So on the next slide, I just want to share, like, up to this point, we've named the complexity and the external pressures and the internal responses that we're having as individuals, right? And now I really want to shift that frame. Your identity is not something to manage. It's not something to fix. Your identity is your leverage, y'all. And let me make that concrete. I'll tell you like a personal anecdote. When I became a consultant, I had to walk into rooms with CEOs and executive directors. And I felt so much pressure. Oftentimes, I was the only Latina. I have an accent. I'm a woman. I'm an immigrant. And also, there's a lot of other areas where I hold privilege, which also is important to name, right? Like my PhD. But what I would do in those spaces is that I would hold back. I would overthink. I would wait for the perfect moment to speak. And I did that because I wanted to come off as eloquent. I wanted to have executive presence. I wanted to sound measured. I wanted to be an executive. Like I felt like I was, oh, like really trying to convince people and prove myself that I belong in that room. And to be honest with y'all, that was not working. That strategy really backfired. By the time I spoke up in rooms like that, the moment had already passed, right? Like I waited too long to say what I had been like waiting in my mind to say for a long time. And so like it felt like what I said just lacked impact. It just like felt flat. And it's not because I didn't have insight, but it was because I was filtering myself so heavily that it diluted my voice. I was performing executive presence and I was not embodying it. So I made a decision to experiment. And I'll tell you, that decision also comes with privilege, right? Like, that's not something that everybody can do. I was very lucky that I was in consulting. You meet a lot of new executives, in a very like common basis. And so I had like this unique opportunity to kind of pilot things and try things out, try things on, and just see how people responded. And so I started to show up more honestly and less editing, right? Like I started to name my background, you know? Like I'm an immigrant. And honestly, like whenever I speak in certain rooms, sometimes people like, they ask that question of like, where are you from? Like, no, but where are you really from? Right. So I would just like get ahead of that. I would just be like, I'm Colombian. I'm an immigrant. I came to the States when I was 13. English is not my first language, but I wasn't sharing it from a place of we're lacking like from a place of like being depleted or lacking, like that being a problem. I was sharing that from a place of, if English is my second language, it means I'm multilingual. Like, that's freaking cool. You know what I mean? And I cannot control how other people feel or how they see that. But if I truly believe that, and if I'm standing in my power and like sharing in a certain way, that's contagious. That becomes a thing that people can believe in. And so I did that, and something shifted. My contributions became sharper, my presence became clearer. And it wasn't because I was like any smarter, or like I did anything relatively like different in terms of the quality of work I was doing, but it was like internally I was thinking about my own identity and like my uniqueness and what I brought to the table, and I just kind of liberated myself and decided to just like show up and like be a little bit more unfiltered. um, and so that's very different from how I thought about leadership in the beginning. Early in my career, I thought leadership meant learning the model and then fitting into that model. And yes, that gets you a certain level, like that could help, but that's not the whole equation. And that's gonna like eventually become a barrier. So the real shifts happens when I stop asking myself, how do I fit this model? And instead I started asking, what do I see that others don't? What do I understand that others might miss? Right? That is what's unique to me. That's what people want to hear from me about. That's where my authority comes from. So as you think about going into these conversations today for the rest of the day, I want to frame something really clearly for you. Even though for some of you, it may feel like you really need that job. You really want access to A, B, and C, right? You like want to be in tech. Maybe you're like an entry level person who's just joining, or maybe you want that promotion, right? I want to remind you that this industry needs you, right? And even though when we're looking for a job, when we're looking to get promoted, we may think that like we really want something really bad, right? And it's like, oh, I hope somebody talks to me, or I hope this happens. Let's flip that script and remember your value. Remember how much you're worth, because this industry needs our voices. They need our unique perspectives. And that is just like an economic argument, like that is just objectively true. That is where we are at in the context of the United States. So if we go to the next slide, as you go into this career fair today, I really want to ground that for you. It may feel like you need the job, like you need the access, like you have to prove yourself. But I don't want you to lose sight of that full equation, right? Because the industry needs your perspective so much. The way you see the problems, the way you navigate complexity, the way you understand people, culture, and systems, that is not extra. That is not just like an extracurricular you bring. That is a lot of value that costs a lot of money from a business perspective. And that's something you have that a lot of your peers don't have. So instead of shrinking to fit what you think they want, I want you to get clear on what you uniquely bring. Because people stand out. The people who stand out are not the ones who are blending in the best, right? The people who stand out are the ones who are clear on their values and who know how to articulate them. And then on the next slide, I do want to be clear about something, which is that this is not all rainbows and butterflies. Standing in your power matters. Believing that you belong in a room matters. But that does erase the structural systems. That doesn't erase the structural systems that we're operating within. And it does not mean that everyone else will see you that way, right? So there is a risk in showing up, and standing in your power and like declaring yourself, like I don't necessarily use this term like your full self, because I don't think that's realistic. We do have to hold back in certain ways. But even when we make the choice, like where I make the choice to introduce myself and say I'm Colombian, like it has paid off for me, has given me executive presence. And there's a risk associated with that because of the society that we live in. And so that is just something that I just want to be very transparent about and just have a very nuanced conversation about that. There are real consequences of how we show up and what we share. And also based on our intersectionalities, that's going to matter, right? Like there's privilege I have, that other people who may identify as Latinos may not have, like the possibility to pilot something, to show up and like be a little bit more vocal about certain parts of their identity, right? And so just being really clear about that as well. And even though the you know, everything I've told you up to this point is just like the power in the honesty and in the empowerment and in the like being yourself, I 100% believe in that and encourage you to think about what that version of yourself is. And I also invite you to think about playing the game, understanding the strategy, understanding the world that we live in. And I'll give you a very concrete example. Um, I, when it comes to the way that I introduce myself in certain spaces, I noticed as I was piloting things that if I introduce myself as Dr. Ana Maria, people respond to me a specific way. I gain people's trust faster, right? And that's something I personally don't love because I don't really believe in that like academic hierarchy. You know, like I'm definitely proud of how hard I work on my PhD, but I don't think that there should be like a stratification of like power based on academics, right? And so like it feels sometimes, or especially in the beginning, it felt off to introduce myself and say like I'm Dr. Ana Maria, you know. But guess what? I piloted, and it like so clearly was a thing that gave me an edge, that gave me that benefit of the doubt, right? And so I use it as a strategy, just to be completely honest with you, because it works, because it's something I tried on and it works for my brand, right? And so so that's the nuance that I want to add. I want you to stand in your power, and I also want you to be strategic and think about like what are the things I need to leverage, like what are the things I need to boast about to also like play the game in the society that we are in. So this is not necessarily about we don't want to reject strategy or reject like standing in our power, but we want to think about what is something that feels aligned and feels empowered for who we are as people. And that's not something that necessarily may happen overnight. You're going to have to try on different ways of showing up. And you could do that today, right? The way you introduce yourself as you go in a round table, as you meet with different people, you could try different ways in which you want to like present yourself, have that executive presence, and see how people resonate, right? Like that is part of like building your brand and figuring out how you want to show up. And so with that, we're going to go to the next slide. And I want to push you into that same reflection, right? So like not at a surface level, but with precision. I want you to ask yourself, what experiences have shaped how you lead beyond your job titles? What have you navigated that has sharpened your judgment? What perspectives do you hold that is not widely represented in your organization? That is not something to downplay. That is your edge. And that edge is where your leadership power sits. So push past the easy answers, because the goal is not to make your identity smaller so you can fit into the space. It is to make it usable so that you can lead with clarity, conviction, and impact. And so now we have about 11 minutes left, and I'm going to give you all about 6 minutes to go into triads. Jolise is going to help us with that. And I encourage you to explore these questions with your peers. And then we'll come back, have one share, and close. Welcome back, everybody. I hope that you were able to have fruitful conversations. I encourage you all to take a screenshot of those questions and really sit down and think about those deeply, right? Like challenge yourself to answer those questions and like to think about how that impacts your leadership, how that impacts how you show up, and use those answers as a tool to help you stand in your power. And you could practice that today as you go through the different conversations that you have. Jolise, if you don't mind going all the way back to the third slide that says Cultura and Leadership Group Coaching, which is slide number 3. But yeah, you could just, yep, perfect. Love that. Okay, So this is a reminder, y'all. If you enjoyed what you experienced today and the conversations that we had, this is a good sample of what group coaching feels like. The beauty about group coaching is that you go through a series of topics that include understanding leadership development, understanding the data behind the Latino statistics, how to widen our circle of support, how to network, how to think about coming up with a sprint goal for your leadership. So we go through really great topics. The point is to help you stand in your power, to feel more confident, and to get the results that you want. And that happens with a cohort of folks who are going through experiencing similar things as you are experiencing. So you build community, you go through a WhatsApp group together, and you build a great cohort of people who are going to then support you as you navigate the next steps. So I can tell you, this will be cohort number 7 that we're starting, and the group chats for each cohort are still active. People are still sharing resources with each other, thinking about next steps, meeting up in person. It's been really, really beautiful to see. And so I would love for you all to consider that. And if you repost my post from LinkedIn with one takeaway from today, that will enter you into a raffle that we would conduct and announce by next week. So I would love to have one of you get that free ticket as well. And so with that, we'll go ahead, Jolie, and go to the very, very last slide. And I just want to take a moment to ground us before we close. You just spent time reflecting on your experience, what has shaped you, what you see, what you navigate, and what you bring into your leadership.
I'm
Any
so sorry, Dr. Ana Maria. There was a question from Meliana.
Yes, what's the question?
They were asking, is it just for Spanish-speaking Latinos? Is your program just for Spanish-speaking Latinos?
Absolutely not. You saw my definition of Latinidad, number one. There's many Latinos who speak other languages other than Spanish, and there are many Latinos who speak English as their main language. The program is in English. Sometimes, if there are participants who want to speak Spanish or Portuguese, there are ways that they could request for breakouts to make that happen. And allies are welcomed as well. Like, we've had participants who lived in Latin America who do not identify as Latinos and who come in with lots of respect and curiosity for connecting with the community. And so that is open to those folks as well. Great question. Okay. So you all, I hope that you really took today to take an assessment of your own identity and the power that you hold, the stories that you bring, the fact that you're here today, and the fact that you're able to be in conversation with the folks that you are means that you overcame so many barriers to be where you are, that you have absolutely so much to offer. And I really hope that you're recognizing the power that you have and how much the tech industry actually needs you and not the other way around. So I invite you to engage with those questions that I shared. Executive presence is not about how well you perform. It is about how clearly you believe you belong in those rooms. I believe you belong. I want to see you all believe that you also belong. If you want to keep the conversation, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn or email me at hello@anamarialc.com. Best of luck with everything that you're doing, and thank you so much for choosing to spend your time with me. Have a great day.
Muchas gracias, Dr. Ana Maria. Everyone, give it up for the wonderful and amazing Dr. Ana Maria. I cannot emphasize enough. Please reach out to her about taking her program. Make sure that you share the information on your socials so that you can potentially win an opportunity of group coaching. And we just appreciate her so much for the work that she does with our community. You are incredible. Thank you.
Thank you so much.